Hello and welcome to another video from the studio. Today I'm set up to sew a heavy-duty bag from a friend who has created it from a jacket and a few pairs of pants, all upcycled, with a bunch of sewing techniques from quilting to shibori handwork in order to make it very strong for her trip to India. This is my heavy-duty walking foot sewing machine that's going to do the bulk of the work. We're probably going to go through 10 or 15 layers today, I'm really not sure, but I'm not worried at all because this thing's a beast. This is the Consew 227 cylinder arm, which is going to help me get in and around the crazy edges of this sling bag in order to put the pieces together with some sort of ease. And here I am operating the 227 Consew cylinder arm sewing machine in order to box tack the strap down for these D-rings. And this is on the top of the sling bag where the top of the shoulder strap will attach. D-rings are helpful for adjustment. That's why we have so many. Plus they looked pretty on the bag. This machine is so great for quick turns, back tacks. You can see my foot maybe going back and forth. I'm toggling between the foot lift and the pedal to actually make the machine go. And the back panel. So these have been pre-made with a jacket, 2 pairs of pants, a bunch of hand stitching, a bunch of quilt work, all of which was done by Ermi. She really likes to reuse her husband's old pants, and her favorite jacket, that's the wild print. And she does this fancy stitching, so that's a cargo pocket being reused. This is very thick material, quilted and quilted and quilted. You can see the binding work I'd already done. Here we're attaching that top strap that I had just sewn on the cylinder arm. I'm operating a heavy-duty walking foot right now in order to go through all of these layers. Just finishing the webbing with the lighter right there. And now we are pinning the back to the front, testing a water bottle, just to see how they fit, holding them in place before we go over to the cylinder arm and attach the back panel to the front panel. Here we're actually putting some darts on the bottom to add a little bit of cross stability on the bottom and make for a nice fit. So you can see I'm holding the bag kind of, it's sort of like a pizza or a cake or something, and just working my way around the perimeter to do an initial stay stitch. And I'm doing it from that angle because it's much easier to sew from that angle. It will be really, really difficult to sew with the bulk of the bag facing the floor on the other sewing machine. So here I'm just going to tack the center before closing the darts. So when sewing something that hasn't been drafted to fit quite together, this is really a huge work in progress, and it's a super fun challenge. I like to start in the middle and then move out. So that's just me tacking the middle. Then I'm going to close each dart. I could guess that this machine is probably sewing through at least 6, maybe 10 layers of fabric, quilting, batting, you name it. And it goes through really well, which is nice. I'm sure to listen to the machine and feel for when it's struggling. I'm also wearing glasses because you never know when something might snap or break. So if you're going to go sewing through heavy things, please make sure you wear eye protection. At this point, I'm pretty much cradling the bulk of the bag like a violin with my left shoulder and my whole arm, and just guiding it through, closing small areas here and there. There's only a few areas that I didn't close because they're probably too thick for this machine, so I'll head over to the walking foot next. So here we are opening the bag to turn it right side out just to see how all of those seams look. It's nice to have a couple pairs of hands here. The zipper is open, so now we're just going to collapse the corners in, being careful around the zipper. and pushing the bottom out. The bag is really starting to take shape here. It looks really good. So we're just checking the areas like the back straps that need to have a little bit more reinforcement and just having a look, and pretty good, ready to go. So we're turning it right or inside out again to go onto the walking foot machine and reinforce probably that whole connecting stitch. Okay, so now operating the walking foot, just pretty much going over the stitch that the other machine did, although now I have the bag flipped and the bulk of the bag is facing up, so I'm sewing from the other direction. And I can go through all the really, really thick layers. Now my hands are working really hard here. I had to actually collapse those corners back in to flatten the seam so I can get around it. That was about 1/2 inch thick right there. Crazy thick. But it went through all the layers, everything is secure. So here I'm just feeling around on the inside and checking the webbing to make sure that everything is tacked down that needs to be strong for the function of the bag. And here I am trimming away the excess seam allowance and grading the seam. Grading meaning that I'm thinning it out, trying to cut away as many layers as I can just to make the binding process easier. So goodbye scraps. Now back onto the cover stitch machine, I'm just changing the thread over from black to white in order to set the binding. And here I'm just pulling up the bobbin thread. Now I'm set up to bind, and I'm doing the binding freehand, so I'm not using any kind of jig that's attached to the sewing machine, putting the binding through under the foot. I'm just using my right hand to hold and guide the binding in place while I go. Now I am pulling on the binding there. Even though I'm not using a jig, that doesn't stop me from trying to simplify the process. So what I did is I used a magnet and a clip, and I just ran the binding through one of the handles of the clip so that it sort of holds it in place for me, so I'm not having to pull it off of the roll. I really just want to focus on getting this binding lined up just on the edge. So here I'm actually skipping over a really thick part because I know this machine's not going to sew through 10 layers of fabric and 2 layers of webbing. And here I'm coming to the beginning. I'm going to clip the binding and fold the edge backwards to finish that edge for me. It makes it easier when I go to the other machine to turn the binding over and finish the seam. So over at the walking foot, I'm once again checking the full seam allowance around the perimeter and trimming and grading anything that looks like it's going to be a little bit wide for the binding to wrap over. Flipping up the binding to see how it's going. This was a very thick area. One more time, just trying to grade and trim away. And now with the bulk of the bag facing up, it's easy to sew the other half of the binding on this machine. So there I am, just going, again, using my right hand to sort of wrap up and hold the binding in place so the stitch can go through the whole area. And we're getting close to that center top seam where the D-rings were placed. And it's just looking really nice the way this binding is wrapping up, and the machine goes right over it like it's nothing. Such a wonderful machine, this walking foot. It goes through things that are thicker than I would ever sew on any normal basis, like butter. Having the right equipment really helps for successful projects. So here I am going around the corner. It's a little bit tricky, and I'm going to probably have to collapse the bottom of the bag in just to be able to access that seam. So here I'm probably going to have to go inside the bag and pull that corner because there's just no way of getting around that area. And there it is, I can open the seam. Now the bag got super crazy thick right there, so I'm trying to trim a little bit more away, and we'll see how the machine wants to go through it. I think here I actually skipped it, and that'll probably just be hand sewn. Or, yep, I'm just gonna skip that. There's no reason that I need to break a needle when it can just be finished by hand later. And here I'm coming back around to the beginning of the binding where I had actually stitched across it, and having a second look, the seam allowance is a little bit wide there, so I'm just undoing the binding so that I can trim that excess seam allowance away. It's pretty thick there too. Now the binding can wrap and close evenly. Now just taking the time to trim and clip whatever threads are hanging out. I'm sure at the end there will be a lot more inspection and trimming and clipping due to the amount of stitches put on this bag, and that looks pretty good. So now it's time to turn the bag right side out again and see how everything looks. I'm really holding on to the zippers there with my right and left hands because I don't want to put any pressure on that junction. The bag at this point was actually easier to turn right side out. I think it's becoming malleable and the seams are used to being flipped one way or the other, which was actually pretty cool. So just checking all of the areas. And now we're going to decide the finished length for that adjustable strap on top. And attach the shoulder strap. We also did a test fitting after this, and the bag fits really well. It's a good sling bag. So then, of course, I decided to do something difficult, which means hanging the bag because I have to sew a piece of webbing on the pockets. In order to put the water bottle in, it would be really nice to have just a webbing pull tab. So I remembered that I sometimes hang items when I'm working on one spot, and it's really helpful. So if you've got a sewing shop and you're handling weird stuff, hang some chains from the ceiling. It makes all the difference. It's almost like you have someone holding it there for you. So here I'm just going back and forth on this thumb loop I created for the pocket. This Consew is really awesome. I like where the reverse lever is. So this is the other pocket, just sewing from a different angle. And you can see my leg going back and forth where I'm operating the knee lift and then the pedal, because I have to lift it a lot. And next we'll just have a little tour of the bag. So that strap is adjustable so that Ermi can stuff, jackets maybe in the front, tons of pockets. That's probably a pant pocket right there, and we have another, I think that's a back pocket from a pair of pants. The zipper opens to the main compartment, which has a cargo pocket from a pair of pants, and then on the other wall there's some pencil pockets, and that's just another back pocket from a pair of pants. So it's so cool that she utilized pockets that were already placed onto a flat surface for the inside of a bag. That's a cool front pocket with a few snaps, another pocket which people would probably not see usually, and there's that thumb hole. Because the print is so busy, there's so many pockets hidden everywhere, more at the bottom. So these 3 horizontal straps would go around a rolling suitcase to hold the bag on. And I did use a different machine to sew some of that Velcro on, a shoe patch. I'll try and do a video of that machine at a later date.